All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this first morning of reInvent 2025. Just if you wish, show of hands for any of you who this is not your first session for today. Nice. We got some early starters. I like it. All right. So my name is Christine Meggitt, and I am a Microsoft licensing specialist here at AWS. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, Gianpaolo and Valerie. And today we're going to speak to you about enterprise software licensing and optimization on AWS. There is going to be a focus on Microsoft licensing, just because we do have some new features that we want to highlight today. So we're excited to share that with you. And before I begin, I'm just going to start with a bit of a quote. Most presentations like to start with an impactful or motivational quote. I'm not sure that's what we have here, but this is something that we do hear from customers on a regular basis, at least once a week. So Microsoft licensing especially can be really difficult, and we're here today to kind of break down some of that complexity for you. Microsoft licensing is complex. There's different agreement types, different license models. Is the product eligible for license mobility benefits? Show of hands if anyone knows about license mobility benefits. Good, all right, nice. So today we're going to speak to you about the optimization and licensing assessment. Val's going to kick that off. That's a fully funded program that we have for enterprise workloads, not just Microsoft licensing. I'm going to take over again, and I'm going to talk to you about bringing your own license, as well as some of our license included offerings. And then I'll go into some licensing optimization best practices, including highlighting some new features that we are going to announce that will help you save some costs. Then I'll hand it over to Gianpaolo, and he is going to speak to you about optimized CPU for license included, which is one of the new features we want to highlight, and also provide a live demo for AWS Compute Optimizer and optimized CPU. Then we'll kick it back over to Valerie, who's going to discuss how to get started, how to start realizing these savings and these new features, especially through our OLA program. All right, I'm going to hand it over to you, Valerie.
Thanks, Christine. Awesome. All right, so a question for the audience. How many of you have ever Googled Microsoft licensing and immediately regretted it? Yes. All right. I see a lot of hands. That was surprising. Great audience engagement. All right, so how do you make informed decisions about migrating to the cloud without becoming an expert in optimization strategies or getting that PhD in Microsoft licensing that Christine mentioned? Well, the good news is that we have a program built at AWS for this. So the Optimization and Licensing Assessment Program, or OLA program that Christine mentioned, is purposely built to help you optimize both your compute and your licensing costs when you're considering a migration to AWS. My name is Valerie Rosenfield. I'm a part of the OLA program. I've been on this team for about 5 years, serving our customers as a migration assessment specialist. So I help customers when they are considering migrating all workloads, but specifically for today, Microsoft workloads to the cloud, review what they have in their environment, understand what their key business priorities are, any open questions that they have, and then recommend an assessment process that will get them answers in the most efficient manner. There we go. There's the OLA slide. Awesome. All right, so OLA is all about simplifying your migration and your licensing journey. What are the benefits for customers? Actually, I'll ask another question. How many of you are customers who are already running on AWS today? Oh, nice. Awesome. You will love this presentation then. How many customers are considering migrating to the cloud in 1 to 2 years but don't run any workloads yet on AWS? Anybody? Awesome. Okay. Any partners in the audience? Awesome, awesome. Okay, that's great context for talking about how OLA helps simplify the migration journey. It's good to know who we have here in the audience. First off, OLA is a data-driven assessment that is built to answer 3 key questions when customers are considering migration or post-migration, which it sounds like is most relevant to the audience here today. The first is collecting an inventory. So we need to know what is in your environment and how is it being used. That visibility is crucial because cloud optimization is all about running as lean as possible, as many of you will know, and we can't optimize what we can't see. So the OLA starts with that baseline inventory of understanding what you have in the environment. Next, we assess the business case for the cloud, or we assess how you can optimize your existing footprint that is already running in AWS. So we will review your environment to understand if rehosting, replatforming, or refactoring is the right approach, show you costing options for each of those, and along the way, we'll show you how you can optimize both your compute and your licensing. All right, so for customers who are considering a new migration to the cloud, the OLA data also serves as the building blocks for helping you plan the journey. So a lot of times you're working with a partner on the assessment, sometimes they're working with the AWS account team, and this data just helps them dive deeper to understand what your priorities are, what your timelines are around migration, and importantly, this program also helps qualify you for different AWS programs and incentives. All right, what is the impact of OLA in numbers? So first off, as Christine mentioned, the OLA comes at no cost to customers. This is an investment that AWS makes in setting customers up for success as they migrate and post-migration for those of you who are already running in AWS. Next, we see that customers that perform one of these exercises and take the recommendations that are surfaced in the OLA achieve a 36% cost reduction. Finally, migrations are about 34% faster when you're executing the migration based on real data instead of guesswork. All right, so we will zoom in a little bit on the Microsoft side of the assessment. So what will you get from the Microsoft licensing analysis that is a part of an OLA? I know that's why most of you are here today. When customers are considering a migration of their Microsoft workloads to AWS, they come to us with 5 key questions normally. And OLA has the answers for those. The first is, what does my Windows and SQL Server footprint look like? So that goes back to collecting that baseline inventory as the first step. And we'll talk about process-wise a little bit what that looks like on a following slide. Next is, how can I reduce my SQL cores? So we see that the majority of our customers spend on Microsoft products is typically on SQL Server, especially in terms of what gets migrated to the cloud. So that is top of mind product when customers are thinking about cost optimization. Next, can I bring my own licenses to AWS or BYOL? Most of you will be familiar with that terminology. The good news is the answer is typically yes. There are, of course, nuances, and that's exactly what the OLA will help you navigate. Even if you can bring your Microsoft licenses to AWS, should you? And today we're going to be talking about an exciting feature that is released for license-included workloads that can help reduce that spend versus BYOL. So in the future, we actually do think that license-included options will become more cost competitive for customers. So stay tuned for that. And finally, how do I optimize my enterprise agreement, my EA renewal with Microsoft as I migrate? So if you can execute one of these assessments shortly before your EA renewal, that's really the prime time to do it, because then you can actually realize the savings that will surface to you in the OLA. As many of you will know, this is usually a 3-year term. So if you can do this exercise in preparation for that, you'll avoid that lock-in or be able to choose more flexible options when you do renew with Microsoft. All right, so tying it back to that first question, how do we collect an inventory of your Windows and SQL Server footprint? OLA can support you in 2 ways for this. If you have a tool on-premise that already has an inventory of your environment, has limited gaps, it has your SQL inventory, you can supply that to us instead of installing a tool, which sometimes takes some time, and we'll clean it, consolidate it, and analyze it for you, turn it into an AWS business case. If you don't have a tool on-premise with high coverage, or you just want to get a fresh data set, AWS, this is part of the investment that we make in the OLA program, will fund a discovery tool for you to collect the information. So there are a few tools that we use for this process. You may be familiar with some of these names. This isn't the full tool set, but it's what we use on the majority of engagements. We have our first-party AWS Migration Evaluator tool, and 2 third parties named Cloudimize and Modelize IT. In terms of the information that we get from Microsoft workloads, you're going to get the editions and the versions of your Windows and SQL Server deployments. We'll get information on how those are utilized, so the CPU, memory, storage utilization, and then the instances and databases that are running. And the purpose of this is just to inform the Windows and SQL Server optimization analysis that we'll walk you through on a following slide. All right, let's get to the good stuff. This is a sample OLA output from a recent customer engagement. And this was an existing customer in AWS, so I think it will resonate with the audience that we have here today. This customer was a large healthcare customer with $16.5 million of EC2 spend. So the first optimization that we are going to surface in an OLA is right-sizing your workloads. So this is the basic level 1 version of optimization where you are just running the most cost-effective instance that meets your performance needs. AWS has a variety of different instance families, and so a lot of times you're running one that doesn't perfectly suit whether that workload is compute, memory, or storage intensive, and just switching the family can reduce your costs. In this case, right-sizing just their Linux EC2 workloads saved them about 12%. This is savings opportunity, so perhaps they execute on 50% of those, but still pretty meaningful savings at $1 million. The next optimizations are specific to Windows EC2 and SQL EC2 workloads, and this is what we're going to dive deeper into with Christine and GP later in the presentation, so I won't harp on it too much, but an exciting new feature that allows you to tailor the number of vCPUs that you have on your Windows and SQL license included instances. As many of you will know, those licensing models are core-based, so anytime you're reducing the core counts, you're going to reduce your licensing costs. And this actually comes directly off of your AWS bill. So if you're purchasing Windows or SQL licensing from AWS, which most of you will be, this will reflect a reduction on your AWS spend. In this case, it was a 13% additional savings, so another $2 million that before this launch wasn't even possible. This is an incremental strategy that is really going to make some important savings changes for our customers. And finally, the template, the standard output that you're going to get for SQL, the additional optimization strategy is identifying SQL workloads that look like they're non-prod. Microsoft has a free edition of SQL Server called Developer Edition, and so during the OLA we'll flag instances that look like they are non-prod based on their naming conventions, so dev, test, QA, etc. We'll summarize the cores that are running on those, show you what you're likely spending on your Microsoft contracts for those non-prod cores, so you can make an informed decision about whether you should downgrade to that free edition of Microsoft SQL Server called Developer Edition. In this case, it was an incremental 2% savings, so a little bit lighter than the other savings, but sometimes this is the easiest one for customers to execute, so it's still pretty helpful. Awesome. So cumulatively, this was a $5 million savings opportunity for the customer, and they were very pleased because for them, even if they only achieved 25% of these savings, that would still be over $1 million, which meant was a meaningful cost reduction and a reinvestment opportunity for them. All right, wrapping up this section. So the final question that we usually address in an OLA is how do I optimize my Microsoft Enterprise Agreement renewal? Again, we highly encourage doing one of these exercises 6 months to 1 year in advance of your EA renewal so you can go into that conversation with the insights from the OLA, especially if you're seriously considering a cloud migration within the next year as well. Is anybody coming up on their Microsoft EA renewal in the next year? Anyone know? We don't know. We're not procurement people, it sounds like. All right. Well, there are some standard insights that will surface as a part of this process, and then we have experts who can dive deeper, look at your unique contracts if you are interested in that type of tailored analysis. But the first one is for Windows Server. Most customers are going to migrate to shared tenancy in AWS, and that comes with the Windows license included. So our standard recommendation is to avoid double payment, you should discontinue the payments that you make to Microsoft annually for Windows Software Assurance to reduce your net costs. For SQL Server, we encourage customers to switch from perpetual licensing to subscription in certain scenarios. This is not right for every customer, but if you know that you will be optimizing your cores further after migration, but you don't have time to do it before your EA renewal, a good option can be to switch to subscription licensing so you have the flexibility to true down sooner. EA is a 3-year lock-in unless you do that subscription licensing, which would give you more flexibility to true down after a year. So it's something to consider if you know you're going to optimize, but you can't do it immediately. Next, and again, this is going to tie to GP's and Christine's presentation on optimized CPU for license included workloads, but evaluating whether license included is a better option for you than bring your own license. Outside of it becoming more cost competitive with this new feature, a lot of customers just prefer not to manage licensing with Microsoft. Makes sense, rightfully so. So you can outsource that to AWS, and we manage the licensing payments to Microsoft when you go license included. And finally, this is not specific. We talked a little bit about edition downgrades before. This is more associated with your production workloads. So if you have production workloads that are running enterprise edition software, a lot of times you're not using the enterprise features, and it's actually less expensive to buy new perpetual standard licenses than just to renew the annual maintenance payments on enterprise edition. Enterprise is about 4 times more as expensive as standard. So that's another thing that you can consider. Assess whether you're actually using the features, and if not, it might be a good opportunity just to make the change, bite the bullet, and downgrade to standard edition. Awesome. So these are the standard recommendations that you will get in an OLA output, but behind every OLA, we have a team of licensing experts like myself, like GP, like Christine, who you can tap into if you have more custom or specific asks, and they can also answer follow-up questions on the licensing insights that we present. Christine is the expert in Microsoft licensing. She's our go-to, so I will pass it over to her to give more detailed insights on how to optimize and manage in the cloud.
Thank you so much, Valerie. All right, so now I'm going to go over a bit of licensing information for you. I'll start with bring your own license and how that works on AWS. So I mentioned earlier, it looks like a lot of you maybe are already familiar with license mobility benefits, but if you're not familiar, this is a software assurance benefit that allows you to bring your eligible products to a shared tenancy environment such as EC2 on AWS. To qualify, the product itself must be eligible for license mobility benefits. So it's not necessarily enough that there's software assurance. The product also must be eligible. And again, the software assurance and eligible subscriptions are required. And this can be deployed on shared or dedicated tenancy. It doesn't have to be shared. And there is a license mobility verification form as well that you are to fill out up to 10 days after deployment. For some products that are eligible for license mobility benefits, we have Azure DevOps, Exchange Server, Project Server, SharePoint Server, SQL Server, of course, System Center Server, and there's some others in there as well. So just to dive in a bit more into SQL Server BYOL, just because it is a very popular product for customers to bring. If we're looking at the core model, one core license is going to cover one vCPU on shared tenant EC2. There is a 4-core licensing minimum set by Microsoft. So you could potentially deploy on an instance smaller than 4 vCPUs, but you would still need to assign 4 cores of licensing as a minimum. Again, software assurance is required. And if we look here at this chart of the R7A instance family, you'll see the R7A large does have 2 vCPUs, but again, you would assign 4 cores just because of that 4-core licensing minimum. If you were to deploy on the R7A 24X large instance, you'd bring 96 cores of SQL. Now for the server cal model, we don't come across this as often, but it is definitely something that some customers do still have, and for specific use cases. Here you're just going to have one server license per EC2 instance or per VM. Plus you'll have the additional user or device cals for all users or devices that have access, and that's direct or indirect access. You'll also need the software assurance or eligible subscriptions on the server licenses and also the cals. Again, just a reminder that license mobility verification form is required. A bit more on BYOL for SQL Server. There is a passive failover benefit available for customers that are bringing their licenses with their software assurance. Again, this is a software assurance benefit, and it is one-to-one, so it does work differently than maybe what you can do on premises. So that is a key note to consider. So one SQL Server EC2 instance, for example, allows you to deploy a secondary passive SQL Server instance of the same size or smaller in terms of vCPUs. This is not eligible for active configurations. If we look at this example here, 2 R5 instances, 8 vCPUs each, the passive instance doesn't need to be licensed for SQL, but the active instance would be licensed for SQL. So overall, 8 cores of SQL Server licensing required for this configuration. Now for non-production, Val touched on this already, but SQL Server Developer Edition is free for you to bring for non-production workloads. So it is a BYOL scenario. And with the release of SQL Server 2025 just the other day, not sure if you saw that, but there is now 2 developer editions available for that version, one for Enterprise Edition, one for Standard Edition, which is great for those of you that are only looking to deploy in Standard Edition. Once you move to production, you can use that Standard Edition developer edition. For anyone deploying SQL Server 2022 or earlier versions, you'd still use the Standard Developer Edition that covers all features up to Enterprise Edition. And as a reminder, to use this Developer Edition, you cannot be connected to a production database, or it can't be used for DR as well. And it does include all the same features as Enterprise Edition, except, of course, where you're using the new 2025 version that does have a Standard Edition. And as with any BYOL on AWS, you are required to bring your own media or install for the products that you're bringing. Now I'm going to shift gears to bringing products that do not have license mobility benefits. There was some changes that were made effective October 1st, 2019. These changes specifically impacted products that are not eligible for license mobility benefits. So this does not impact anything I've just spoken about previously. To bring a product that is not eligible for license mobility benefits, such as Windows Server, the version you're deploying first must be a version that was released before October 1st, 2019. For Windows Server, that's version 2019 or earlier only. You must also have perpetual licenses, not subscription. And the licenses must have been originally purchased before October 1st, 2019, or originally purchased within an EA term that started before October 1st, 2019. So again, this impacted products only not eligible for license mobility benefits. That would be Windows Server, Visual Studio, and Office applications. SQL Server without software assurance would also not have license mobility benefits, so that would also be impacted if you did not have software assurance on your SQL. Just to dive a bit more into Windows Server BYOL, as it does come up quite often. If you have those eligible licenses and you're deploying version 2019 or earlier, you would use dedicated hosts, and you would license the total number of physical cores of the hosts. So if we're looking at an R5 EC2 dedicated host, for example, that has 48 physical cores, you'd license 48 cores of Windows Server Data Center, and you'd be covered for any number of R5 instances that you can fit on that host. This also is true for our recently launched service, Amazon EVS, or Elastic VMware Service. It is running on dedicated, so it does allow you to bring your Windows Server licenses as well. Again, software assurance is not required for bringing Windows Server because it doesn't have license mobility benefits. So whether you're using BYOL or you're moving to a license included model, as Valerie mentioned, that's a great way to reduce costs at your next renewal, to lower that software assurance, as you won't be needing it. Now for license included and some of the offerings we have there. For Windows Server license included, this is most commonly used by customers because it does allow customers to deploy on shared EC2. It covers any edition. We don't always list an edition, but our licensing agreement with Microsoft is very specific, very customized, and it covers any edition. It also includes unlimited Windows Server CALs, as well as 2 remote desktop services connections for each EC2 instance that you're using license included. And again, this is a required licensing option on shared EC2. It's also required for versions 2022 and 2025 of Windows Server, and that's because those versions were released after the October 1st, 2019 changes. These Windows Server license included is billed per vCPU per second for on-demand instances. It is an option that can be used for external use. So for example, if you are an ISV or a SaaS provider that was impacted by the SPLA BYOL changes, where Microsoft no longer allows SPLA BYOL on AWS, license included is a compatible option for those workloads. And if you need additional remote desktop services connections, we do offer those as license included, but you can also BYOL or bring your own RDS user CALs with software assurance through license mobility benefits. Now for license included SQL Server. We offer this in the core model only, so there's no CALs required. We offer this in standard, enterprise, and web edition. Again, with the release of SQL 2025, there is no new web edition available. So 2022 web edition is the last edition available, and it is a very specific use case. So web edition can only be used for publicly accessible websites. If you're not familiar with that edition, that probably means you can't use it, but it is something that we do offer for up to 2022. All right, so this is also billed per vCPU per second for on-demand instances, and it can also be used for external use. So again, if you're an ISV or a SaaS provider, this option also replaces the SPLA BYOL that was removed. All right, so now on to some licensing optimization recommendations and best practices. So we do have a free tool called AWS License Manager. This is a great tool to use to input your licenses that you're bringing. It can also be used to take a look at your license included instances. This is a great way to keep track of what you're using. You can use it also to integrate with dedicated hosts and other services. So I highly recommend checking this out if you haven't already. It can be used with a variety of different software. It doesn't have to be Microsoft. There's a lot of different vendors that it supports, and you can use it even for on-premises or workloads in other clouds as well. This is just a view of what it looks like when you're inputting some licenses, and you can choose whether you want to enforce a license limit or don't have it enforced, where you just get a warning message if you go over your licensing. If you are interested in learning more about this tool, I'm also speaking at a second session on Thursday called MAM315 Licensing Management and Optimization, where we are going to speak about some new licensing features through License Manager. That's on Thursday, December 4th at the MGM Grand. This QR code will take you to the catalog so you can see where that's located. All right, instance right sizing. As Valerie mentioned, this is a core component of our OLA offerings. This can benefit license included. Our products are licensed per vCPU for Windows Server and SQL Server. So the more you're right-sized on the instance size, the more your licensing costs will be right-sized as well. For BYOL, this is also beneficial because SQL licensing for BYOL is licensed per vCPU if you're bringing core licenses. And again, right-sizing is going to optimize your licensing that you're bringing over as well. On the Windows Server side, this can help in both ways. BYOL, if you're right-sizing, you can end up with fewer hosts, which means lower infrastructure costs and lower licensing costs as well. And again, OLA is what's going to help you figure all of this stuff out. Now, for a new feature that we just recently launched, Amazon EC2 High Availability for SQL Server. This is a new feature available for license-included SQL Server that now allows you to not license the passive or secondary node. Previously, this was required. You'd have to license both if you were using license included. Now, if you're using license included, you will be exempt from the SQL license included costs on that secondary passive node. So this supports 2 EC2 instances per SQL Server high availability cluster. It supports always-on availability groups as well as failover cluster instances. You only pay for the Windows Server license included costs on the passive nodes as well as the compute costs, of course. The passive SQL Server instance needs to be the same size or smaller than the active SQL Server instance. And this is available for new and existing instances. So you can go into the console to update your instances if you have these already, or you can use this for new deployments. It does require AWS Systems Manager Agent to be installed and running on the instances for this to work. If you want to learn more, we do have this QR code here as well. We have lots of documentation for you, including a blog that's been released as well. So check that out. And for another new feature that has been recently launched, and this is going to be spoke about a lot in our session. GP is going to take over for me shortly. But this is optimized CPU for license included. So previously to this launch, customers could use optimized CPU to lower their number of vCPUs on an instance, which would let them bring fewer SQL core licenses. This now is available for license included as well. And it not only impacts SQL Server license included, but it also impacts Windows Server license included. So this is going to be a great way for customers who, for the most part, have to use Windows Server license included on shared EC2, if there's room for optimization there, and to either disable hyperthreading or use a specific number of vCPUs, this will immediately lower your license included costs for Windows Server as well as SQL Server. Using this feature, you will see a separate billing for licensing, so it will be broken out of your EC2 instance costs, which is new. Typically, without using this feature, your license included costs will be within your compute costs. This feature will separate those. And again, this is available for new and existing instances. So great news here. Here's just an example of the X1E family type. You can see the max vCPUs is the default vCPUs the instance size comes with. You can turn these down all the way to the examples shown here. But just a reminder, SQL Server licensing is a 4-core minimum, even for license included. So we wouldn't necessarily recommend going all the way down anyways, but if you were to go below 4, you'd still see license costs for 4 cores. All right, so that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to GP.
Thank you. So my name is Gianpaolo Albanese. I'm a solutions architect specialist. Been at AWS for 8 years. The one thing that I got from the session so far is that I have really trouble sleeping at night. So if you want to fall asleep very quickly, you can read about the licensing that Microsoft provides. I will appreciate actually Polly, Amazon Polly, to actually read it to me very slowly and softly, and you fall asleep right away. Or you can go to a bar, but this is probably works best. So let's move in and talk about a little bit about optimized CPU and SQL Server. So why is this important? So SQL Server licensing is based on active CPUs that are visible to the operating systems. And so what we are seeing more and more is that customers need to deploy larger EC2 instance sizes because they have specific requirement, either IOPS requirements or memory requirements. And so therefore, if you want a 512 gigs of RAM allocated to your instance, you have to deploy maybe an R6 IDN 16X large. It's a lot of money, right? And again, there is gold, right? This is gold coins in there. So every time you basically spin one of these machines up to accommodate one of your workloads, again, it's a huge cost that happens on licensing. And so again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of minimize the cost. So what can we do? As already Valerie and Christina mentioned, we do have a new feature. It's optimized CPU. And what optimized CPU will allow us to do is it allows you to actually modify the instance type after launch. So what you can do is after you start analyzing your workload and trying to figure out exactly what really works, or what is the perfect balance between CPU, memory, and storage, then at that point you can actually stop the instance and start making some modification to the instance. In fact, some of the things that you can do, or how this feature works, is that after you accept the default instance that you have deployed, you can go back and you can start working on disabling the hyperthreading on the CPU. So you allow now to modify that after you stop the instance. And what we notice that most of the times when you're dealing with high performance compute workloads, or maybe something that's dealing with scientific calculations, disabling hyperthreading actually helps a lot, right? You see an improvement because there is no context switching with the operating systems. And so at this point, what you can do is you can also now go even further. After you disable the hyperthreading, you start analyzing your workload. Now you can go back and say, maybe I can actually also trim down the CPUs. I don't have to dedicate 4 CPUs for my Windows server. Maybe I can go for 2 if you're not running SQL Server. Remember, SQL Server requires 4 CPUs. There is no way around that. So that's another way that you can kind of reduce cost. So what are some of the key benefits that some of our customers are seeing? First of all, you start seeing a reduction on your SQL Server cost, especially if you bring your own license into AWS. And there is a new feature coming up where this will available also for license included on SQL Server. But what I also know, there's a lot of commercial software. They have specific requirements. There are many CPUs you need to run to be compliant. Especially if you have like a third-party support and you need to open up a case, you want to make sure that you follow the guidelines from the third-party vendor or the CATS application requirements. Something else that you can see is some customers are seeing some really performance improvements when they disable the hyper-threading on some of the workloads. Again, you need to test that out. And we do have CloudWatch and Cloud Metrics that you can kind of collect, or if you have your own collection agents, you can kind of start collecting this information and analyze it often. And again, we have another exciting tool that we can use to actually help you go through and figure out exactly what is working for your particular workload. And so we did see some customers now improving and having performance improvement just by disabling hyper-threading. And also what they're starting seeing is that now there is a lower infrastructure cost. And that's key because, again, AWS is a little differentiator with other cloud providers you might see. We always try to help customers save costs, right? We provide you the tools to analyze your workload, and then you can work with any one of us, a solutions architect or a specialist, to kind of help you kind of figure out where can we kind of trim things or kind of lower the throttle a little bit so that you can save some money. So what are some of the best practices, specifically when you're dealing with SQL CPU optimization? Well, there's some things that you really need to be careful and watching out for. So first things that we noticed is that once you disable hyper-threading on SQL Server specifically, we don't see any major impact on performance on the machine. In fact, that's a quick win, right, for saving money. And the beauty of this is that, especially if you're dealing with online transactional processing, actually benefits the operating system, and the server actually runs much better and by performing. The next step, so with the first steps, you see almost 35% on cost. But if you go to the next steps and now start looking and monitoring your environment even more, you start realizing maybe you can kind of throttle down even the core count. And if you do this, you can actually achieve a 47% cost savings without impacting your workload. Now I want to be extremely careful there. You have to continuously test the environment and collect metrics to make sure that you're actually achieving those goals. Because sometimes what's happening is you might have certain processes or certain systems that at the end of the month are very transactional. They're running some big batch jobs, right? And you want to minimize any impact on your performance. And the other thing I want to mention is actually you need to monitor the IOPS and CPU ratio. So we found like a sweet spot. 7,000 to 8,000 IOPS per CPU is the sweet spot where you can get actually good performance, and also there is a cost savings associated. If you start deviating from this IOPS requirement per CPU, if you go too high, you have system contention. Because what happens is now the IOPS are very high, and what's happening, the subsystem is actually working very, very hard. So now the storage I/O system is actually being impacted. If you go the other way around, where you throttle down the IOPS, now you're seeing that your CPU is actually idling. It's not doing anything. It's waiting for the system to provide data. So again, testing is key. You want to kind of you want to kind of stay or monitor the IOPS for your environment. And lastly, test. You have to test your workload, test with load, with no load, test over the weekend, nights, Black Friday, just test it. We have a lot of tools that we can provide you. We have CloudWatch metrics that can basically help you monitor all these things. You can also set alerts as well, or you can create an SNS topic and send the information through your email or to a dashboard. So now it's a part of the demo. So how do you do this? So let me just switch over to my screen. And if everything works well, there you go. So you have your console here, right? Don't look at my bill. This thing is bothering me. There we go. So I have a bunch of instances running on my system, right? And right now I'm just going to second guess and see what's happening, right? I have no metrics, but let's say that I have this SQL Server that I'm running on M5X large, right? And right now, if you look at the instance, right, if you don't know anything about M5 large, you can actually see how many CPUs are allocated to this system. Oh, sorry, that's the guy. There we go. All right, once you look at the details, you go on the bottom and you can actually see some information about the server itself. So right now, if you can tell on the screen, 8 CPUs are actually allocated to this virtual machine. It's by default. So I deployed the SQL Server, I've deployed Enterprise on it, I automatically enabled 8 CPUs on it. But let's say that you want to actually now start trimming down or start playing around with the hyper-threading. Well, your first thing you have to do is you actually have to stop the instance, right? Now, once the instance is stopped, it will take a couple of minutes, a minute or so. We can actually go in there and not start playing around with the hyper-threading first, right? And you will see that after you do that, you can actually start the instance up again, and it will actually now allocate only the number of CPUs that or vCPUs that I've allocated to a particular system. So let's refresh this real quick. Okay. All right, that's the guy. So you go to Actions, you go to Instance Settings, and now you have a new option here that says Change CPUs. Here it actually allows you, and it gives you a little snippet there. It tells you that you can lower your Windows with SQL Server standard vCPU licenses, right? By just playing around with these numbers. The one thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable hyper-threading. Right now we have two threads allocated per CPU across my server. Notice what happens. First of all, you get this message that if you're used to looking at the billing and the way the EC2 instances are actually charged, usually if you do a license include, you only see one cost, right? Once you actually start playing around with the threading or CPU cores that you enable and disabling, it actually is going to split the cost. So you're going to see two prices there. One for the instance and one for actually the number of CPUs actually allocated. So I'm just going to change it. The only thing you have to do after this is just start the instance. You give it a minute. Right? And now you can see that the number of vCPUs now it's 4. So going forward, if you have a license included with SQL Server running on it, you're going to only pay for the 4 licenses now instead of 8. You can do this on every single server across your fleet, and you're already going to start seeing some cost savings. But obviously, you're going to ask yourself, am I going to go through 5,000 servers and start clicking on things and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work? Obviously, you don't want to do that, right? So another tool that we have, and I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint, yeah, is the AWS Compute Optimizer. This is a great tool. And the reason why is because it takes the thought process around figuring out what works and what doesn't work in your environment to the next level. So what is it? It's actually powered by machine learning. You're going to hear about AI across the board. Well, this is actually a tool that I really love to use because it actually saves me a lot of time when I start analyzing my environment. And you will see why, right? So it is powered by machine learning. It actually analyzes historical data that is being collected from your systems, from CPU, memory, IOPS consumption, and it starts just tracking all this data, right, internally. It starts to identify some patterns that maybe you have missed. So you run this in your environment, you turn it, literally it's a flag that you enable, and it starts analyzing your environment for you, right? And then what it starts doing, it starts making predictions. It starts telling you, okay, you know what? I see a cost savings of X thousands of dollars a month if you make these modifications. In the past, we had similar tools that kind of did this. However, they only provide you, like, you can use Cost Explorer, right? You can use AWS Budget. You can use all these other tools. They kind of combine them together to give you that data, and then you have to figure out what you want to do with this data. So what happens? Well, as it goes through, it starts looking at your EC2 instances. It starts looking at your auto-scaling groups, the EBS volume, the storage, the Lambda function. Now we have also Aurora and RDS databases that actually are being monitored as well. And also we have ECS on Fargate, and we're going to have more and more services being monitored by Compute Optimizer. Now, what happens, because it's using AI to actually do all this, right? It's all automated. Think about this. You have a guy working 24/7, monitoring your whole environment, collecting data constantly, then using the data, running some algorithm against it, and then trying to figure out what will work best for you. So again, it's a predictive cost optimizations, so you really don't have to do anything. You just have to turn on the flag. It actually looks at your performance on the subsystem as well. So if you remember before, we had to find that sweet spot, 7,000 to 8,000 IOPS per CPU. We don't have to do that now, right? The system will do that for you. And also it's going to make some data-driven recommendations, which is very cool. So I just have a quick dashboard, and then I'm going to jump into my laptop again and show you my environment, because I had to collect some data first. But for example, it gives you $185 a month cost savings. Not a big deal, right? You click on the EC2 instance, but you can see there on the left side, all these other services that is actually monitoring for you, right? And again, like I mentioned before, more and more services are going to be added. And then what it'll do is it'll actually make a recommendation for you. It'll look at all your environment. It is actually looking at your workload. And then it's going to actually say, wait a minute, some of these instances are actually optimized. Some of them are over-provisioned. And then it actually tells you what is over-provisioned, why. In this case, CPU over-provision, EBS IOPS over-provision, and so on and so forth, because I haven't done anything with these machines. Basically, they're sitting idle, right, running something. But if you look on the right pane, it actually gives you an estimated monthly cost of what the cost savings are. So if we go back to my screen, yep, and we do AWS Cost Optimizer, Compute Optimizer, all right? So let's look how my account looks like. Definitely over-provisioned. There we go. So I have a cost saving. This is just my personal account, right? I can actually save $1,000 a month. I mean, AWS saves $1,000 because I'm not paying for this. But look at this, some of the numbers, 15% cost savings. And what I really like about this, I can click on my EC2 instances, and now I have the data that I need, right? It tells me that my SQL Server optimized CPU is optimized, but there is a bunch of other instances that are not optimized. Now, the cool thing about this is that it's actually going to start making some recommendations of what the current instance type is and what is the recommended instance size to go to. Now, the other thing that you can also do is start using this data to, instead of maybe changing instance sizes, because now we have the optimized CPU that we can leverage, go back and start playing around with the hyper-threading and, and turning off the CPUs on your system. So you don't necessarily, but you can use this as a guide to kind of help you through it. Very cool stuff. So the question that you might have now is how to get started with all of this, right? So I'm going to give it back to Valerie to continue. Thank you, Valerie.
Awesome. Thank you, GP. All right, so we've just seen the power of optimized CPU for license included in real life. We saw some good usage of the AWS Compute Optimizer tool to right-size your workloads in other ways. You may be wondering how you can start assessing the savings that are possible in your environment. So as GP mentioned, we do have these self-service tools in the AWS console. Compute Optimizer is a great starting point if you like to get in the data and do it yourself. But the OLA program is here to support as well wherever that would be useful for you. So Compute Optimizer does have the resource utilization data. You'll see your CPU, memory, IOPS, throughput usage there. It doesn't quite yet, since this feature of optimized CPU for license included was just released, have the the recommendations on whether you should disable hyperthreading, whether you should just reduce the vCPUs instead of changing the instance type. So that's where OLA can step in the interim while they're rolling out those features to AWS Compute Optimizer. For existing AWS workloads, this program is programmatically available for any customers that are carrying AWS Enterprise support. This criteria is really just tied to the fact that when customers have enterprise support, we have permissions to the necessary data to do the OLA savings analysis. So this is actually a very quick exercise for us. For you who are already running in AWS and carrying enterprise support, we can turn around the OLA insights in less than a week usually, and it requires almost no lift from you. The only thing that would require lift is really you tagging your SQL bring your own license workloads if you are using any of those. So in order to launch this assessment, most of our sellers will be familiar with the OLA program. AWS is a big company, so your specific account manager might not know about the program. So ask your AWS account manager, ask your services partner if you're working through a partner about launching an OLA, or you can use the QR code that is here. This will just pop up an email that asks some questions about your environment and sends those responses directly to our team so we can get you started on your OLA for your existing EC2 environment. For your non-AWS workloads, the program is also available for all customers. We do see, since these savings that we've reviewed today are so Microsoft focused, that it makes the biggest impact when you have around 100 Windows servers or 10 SQL servers, licensable SQL servers in your environment. But we have the offering for all customers. Again, reach out to your AWS account manager, say you learned about OLA at reInvent, and they should know how to launch one. If not, you can contact us through this direct QR code as well. Awesome. All right. So here we've talked a lot about optimized CPU for license included today. The census feature was so recently released. We've just started to analyze customer environments. I have some savings from the last month of assessments that we've done that I'll show you. But in the meantime, we have these blog posts, we have the user guide. We encourage you to check out that documentation. It's very thorough. And there's a lot of self-service tools that can help you get started immediately. Give you a minute in case anybody wants the QR code. Awesome. All right. So these are just a handful of results. Again, these savings are pretty preliminary since we just released the feature, but I tried to provide a range of customer sizes and sample savings. We have a customer with $2 million about EC2 spend. They had projected savings of 15% on their EC2 compute just from the optimized CPU for license included feature. So again, this is incremental to right sizing. This is incremental to other SQL reduction opportunities we discussed, like non-prod dev downgrades. So 15% of savings that weren't achievable before are now possible. An even more impressive savings for a medium-sized customer that probably wasn't very optimized, 30% savings for them, 10% savings for another customer, 24% savings for an extra large customer. On average, what we're seeing right now is around 20% savings. Again, it's not a huge data set, but that's about where we expect the savings to land on average, 20% on your overall EC2 compute, just from this one strategy. All right. So we've talked a lot about OLA today. Today, OLA is a guided program. We have self-service tools like the one GP mentioned, like AWS Compute Optimizer. Today, the OLA program is guided. So you engage AWS. I either work with you directly or sometimes you'll work with a certified OLA partner. We'll help you run the data collection. We'll do the analysis. We'll read out the insights to you. But in an ideal world, this would all be automated. And that is what we're moving towards with our tool called AWS Transform. So this is available to you in the AWS console. And over time, the OLA insights that we've reviewed today are going to roll into AWS Transform. It's not quite at parity yet, but we encourage you to be an early adopter, check out the tool, see what types of migration recommendations and licensing insights you can already get from it today, and provide us feedback. Let us know what you think about it so we can continue enhancing it. All right, today's session was heavily focused on Microsoft workloads. That was on purpose, but we do want to do a quick plug that for all major workload types, we have an assessment offering under the OLA program. So we have modules for EUC, for storage, and user computing, for storage, for VMware, for Oracle. So let us know what your mix of workloads are, or your account manager or your services partner, and we'll make sure we customize the assessment to what you have. And again, we just have the QR code if you would like to reach out directly to the OLA team. All right, we are just about ready to wrap up. I have the various QR codes on the next two slides that we reviewed throughout the deck. So our Optimize CPU for License Included blog, requesting an OLA, and learning more about AWS Transform Assessments. Give you a minute for those. On the next slide, we have a link to our Skill Builder AWS platform, and this is a training platform with training is on every AWS topic that you could imagine. There's over 1,000 deep dives, so whatever topic you are interested in, we encourage you to check out our Skill Builder platform to continue your Amazon AWS learning journey. So this will link you directly to the Microsoft Workloads section of that Skill Builder page, but again, lots of trainings available to you there. Awesome, so I'll wrap us up with a couple key takeaways. We've talked about three main things in this presentation. First, Microsoft licensing is complex, but we have the OLA program available to you to provide clarity on the best way to migrate your Microsoft workloads to the cloud. Second is that we have our very new, exciting Optimize CPU for License Included features. We're really excited to see how this can make license included offerings more cost advantageous for customers and really reduce that license compliance management that they have when they contract directly with Microsoft. And finally, AWS Transform is the future. We want to make this as accessible as possible for our customers. So we'll continue to iterate and bring these optimization insights into AWS Transform, and we encourage you to check that out. Thank you very much for joining us, for spending the whole hour with us. We look forward to partnering with you on your migration journey or optimizing your existing AWS environments. We'll be around if you have any questions. Thank you very much. If you don't mind filling out the survey in the mobile app, we would really appreciate it. Enjoy reInvent.